The Big Ten is going all in on adding more Friday night games. The Big 12 is trying out Sunday for the first time. Man, this is so good for college basketball.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. This fine gentleman to my side is Mr. Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and we're elated that you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We want to remind you that you can get every episode ad-free on Amazon Music, as we thank you for making us your first listen or watch of the day. Special shout out to all you everydayers joining us and all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. Welcome in. This episode's brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's a brand new week. We're 5 weeks to the day until the tip-off of the season. We're about to get, Andy, tomorrow is October. That means it is the month of all these charity exhibitions. It's coming, folks. Ready or not, buckle up. I cannot wait. I'm getting those giddy butterfly feelings, and this is awesome. Andy, the Big 12 schedule came out on Thursday, so we're going to unpack that. What does it look like now that we've added 4 more teams, all the rhythms, and what are some of the great matchups we're going to get? But also, later in the show, we want to talk, I'm sure you all heard the news of UNLV's quarterback opting out last week because of some wacky NIL stuff. We're not going to necessarily talk about that, but we do want to talk about the ripple effects of it and what it might mean for college basketball, plus NCAA President Charlie Baker making some tone-deaf comments in regard to this. Mr. Patton, very quickly, I'll run the Big 12 schedule nitty-gritty details and then tee you up to get us going on this thing. Very quickly, 16 teams now. As a reminder, Texas and Oklahoma are out. Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado are in. We'll talk much more about that in our Big 12 conference preview show. It is now a 20-game conference slate for the first time. And so the makeup of that, I love how they're doing this, where you got 15 opponents, 5 home only, 5 away only. 5 home only, 10 away only, 5 that you play both home and away. That all adds up to 20. I'm pretty good at math. And in the Big 12's release, it says, quote, opponents were selected based on a combination of geography, historical results, and a poll of the coaches to best balance the schedule in terms of travel and competitiveness, end quote. The conference slate will run Monday, December 30th through Saturday, March 8th, and we get no times or TV yet. Andy, the first thing I want to just mention and hear your thoughts on, we didn't even really talk about this, but I'm reminded of it as I read it. I appreciate the Big 12's transparency in sharing with us how they came to set this schedule up.
Yeah, that was going to be the first thing I talked about, to be honest, is I'm fascinated, I like that the Big 12 is being transparent. They're communicating this. I'm curious how other conferences have made these determinations, and I'm curious how much the transfer portal era, where rosters are entirely turning over year, not everywhere, obviously, but at enough places that it has to be a factor. And they alluded to historical results. And I find that interesting as well, of like, I can't imagine you would schedule Colorado a particularly difficult schedule because, well, they were good, this year and this year and this year. And it's like, okay, but this Colorado roster lost all of their, a lot of their talent from last year. Like, how do you reckon with that? Because you can't assume, oh, well, I'm just assuming this team is going to be worse. So I'm going to, it's a tricky situation. You have bloated conference schedules, you have more teams, you have new teams, you have a lot of different factors in the Big 12 and in the Big 10 and in the SEC and kind of throughout college basketball, where trying to figure out how to schedule these, how to put it all together is really challenging. And I think you're right. The fact that the Big 12 has at least said, hey, this is what we did. We pulled the coaches, we used historical data, and we used geography, which I think is important. I think geography has to be a factor in these conversations. But yeah, it's a unique situation to try to put together these schedules and make them as quote unquote fair as you possibly can without everybody playing every single team the same amount of times. But it seems like the Big 12 prioritized the right things, looking at their statement as well as looking at the actual schedule. But, some teams aren't going to be happy with the way the schedule laid out, and that's just kind of part of the deal.
Yeah. Well, Man, so very excited to see how this all comes together. I mentioned this in the cold open. We're used to a full Saturday slate of Big 12 games. Usually every Big 12 team plays on a Saturday, but now, Andy, for the first time, the Big 12, is also expanding to NFL Day once the NFL is already done. And so basically every weekend except February 15th and 16th, we won't get anything that Sunday. And the final weekend of the season, no games on Sunday, just all 16 teams, 8 matchups that Saturday, March 8th. And so really, really interested in this. And Andy, this is, I think, the big part of the conversation we want to have before we continue to look at the makeup of the kind of regularity and cycle of these games is, man, college basketball is a sport fighting for eyeballs, fighting to make its mark and to be relevant at a bigger level. And so we've said, look, you've just got to try new things and go in on different ideas. And so I love the Big 12 saying, all right, so let's try Sunday. There's no NFL games. They don't own Sunday in February and March. So why not us? Let's make that happen. I love it because, we get Big 10 games Sunday as well. This is great, I think, for the sport.
Yeah, I think so too. And the Big 12 is, again, other conferences are doing this as well. We saw the Big 10 is making a push to have more Friday games, which I think is good. Last year, we saw the Mountain West played a fair amount of Friday games. I think the Big East had some Friday games as well. So we're starting to see that. I'm sure that they're looking into the data and determining, like, does this make sense for us to do? And the Big 12 obviously came to the conclusion that Sundays make some sense for them to have some of their games on Sundays, obviously, for some of the big events. Or big, the March 8th, obviously they're having all their games there because that's the end of the regular season. But it's nice to see conferences be willing to kind of break some of their tradition and change in ways that is a little bit of a risk. Like we can talk about it later in the show, but the Big 12 has a lot of marquee games on Wednesdays too. And Wednesday's kind of a day where we've seen some conferences try to make Wednesday a priority, but it's usually not a huge day of marquee games. You have your big Monday, you have your Saturdays, of course. A lot of conferences play mostly Thursday, Saturday. You have some conferences kind of tapping into Friday, but Wednesday's been a bit of a quieter day. And the Big 12 is going to kind of try to capitalize on that a little bit and try to make it so that they're the thing to watch on Wednesdays. And I think a combination of knowing that changes, trying new things might lead to some great results, as well as we already have to change things up because we have 4 new teams coming into the conference. If you're the Big 12, you've had 8 new teams in the last 2 years and then 2 teams leave. So everything's different. Everything's already different. You might as well, if you're going back to the drawing board when you're making your schedule, you might as well try something different, try something new, experiment. If at the end of the year they determine, wow, those Sunday day games did terrible, the numbers were not worth it at all, they might scrap them. And next year, and we'll probably never see that data, but next year, if the Big 12 schedule comes out, 365 days from right now, and there's way less Sunday games or no Sunday games, that's probably a good indication that it didn't go very well for them from a TV perspective. But I like that they're trying. If it fails, it fails. But I'm glad to see. And again, we're praising the Big 12, but the Big 10 did this too. And as we see other conference schedules come out, we'll probably see some more of this stuff as well. And I think it's a good thing for the sport to be trying to innovate and find ways to make sure that their product gets in front of as many eyeballs as possible. Ideally sometime in January and February, because a lot of people just wait till March. And if they can get people a little bit sooner, that's going to be good for the sport going forward.
And I mean, I'm trying to think about other leagues that have done things like, I bet the NBA didn't always own Christmas Day, but they're like, hey, you know what we should try? And then they went in on it. And now it's like, what do we do on Christmas Day? Well, that's the NBA's version of Thanksgiving Day where everyone's watching NFL games. And so it's like, man, you just got to try stuff. Andy, you're spot on. If it fails, it fails. And then we figure something else out. I just want to see them trying stuff. And that's what's happening. What's funny to me is when I saw there were no Sunday games on February 16th, I was like, oh, I wonder if that's the Super Bowl. It's not. The Super Bowl is the week before, and there are Big 12 games that day. So I'm curious. I need to figure out like what event is going on February 16th that we're not getting.
I thought that was odd too. I didn't find an answer to it, but I thought it was odd.
Yeah. So it's like, it would have made more sense. Obviously there's got to be something we're missing, but it would have made more sense to not have games on February 9th and to have them on the 16th. Anyway, Andy, the other thing we really like about this schedule is that there is this beautiful rhythm and consistency to it. The entire Big 12 schedule is 10 weeks worth of games. Everyone will play twice every week. One midweek game somewhere Monday to Wednesday and one weekend, Saturday or Sunday. Additionally, everyone flip-flops every week. You play one game at home, one on the road, or one on the road and one at home. And so I think that's a great thing, Andy, to just as a coach or as a player, I'm going to play Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, and I'm going to play Saturday or Sunday. And if I played at home on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, I'm going to be on the road this weekend. And while there's so much to deal with the bloat of conferences, I think one of the good things we're getting out of it is that we're seeing conferences have to be more very consistent in their rhythms of scheduling, kind of like the Pac-12 always was with their travel partners and those rhythms that they had. And so ultimately, I think this is one of the good things to come out of the bigger conferences is we've got to be more consistent, and the Big 12 is showing that in what they've done.
Yep, I agree 100%. Big 10, Big 12 both did a nice job of putting these schedules together in a way that's consistent, that's predictable, and I think it benefits the teams, especially the teams that are joining those conferences geographically from a farther area, the Pac-12 schools that are joining those leagues. I think it's helpful to have this kind of continuity going forward, and I'm hoping that it continues as those teams kind of get more comfortable being in their new conferences. Well, Isaac, the Big 12 has an absolutely loaded Big Monday schedule. Plus, Arizona, the best new team joining the conference, they got a pretty cushy front half of their Big 12 conference slate, as cushy as it gets in the Big 12, we should clarify. But it's going to get real rough for them at the end of the season. We're going to talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season getting a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on FanDuel. Right now, multiple Big 12 teams, really good chances to win that national championship. It starts, of course, with Kansas, Bill Self's team at plus 1,000 to win the 2025 national championship. Houston behind them at plus 1,600. You got a pair of Big 12 schools next at Arizona and Baylor, both at 2,500. And then Iowa State at plus 3,000. Lots of good odds there for the Big 12 taking home the Natty. Check them all out at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Isaac, continuing our conversation here, talking about the Big 12 conference schedule. We did this last week with the Big 10 and had some great conversations, not only about just the kind of general strategy that we're seeing these bigger conferences kind of use to keep their new teams happy and kind of keep things as simple as they possibly can, while understanding that it's not really particularly simple to do this. But now I want to talk about the actual matchups here, and in particular, Big Monday, which of course is dominated by the Big 12 and the ACC. We have some extraordinary matchups that we're going to get an opportunity to see. And Isaac and I were talking offline beforehand because we don't have the game times for the Big 12 games. We do have game times and TV information for the ACC. So kind of trying to project how we think some of these schedules might end up kind of laying out. And one of the ones that I'm most interested in is the first one on January 27th. You have, for the ACC, you got North Carolina State at Duke. That game is at 8:30 Eastern time. But the Big 12 game is Iowa State at Arizona. So would you have a game where Arizona, the host, is playing before Duke? That seems a little crazy, but does that mean you're going to have a 10:30 p.m. Eastern time tip for Iowa State at Arizona? I'm not sure. It's going to be very fascinating to see how some of this Big Monday gets laid out, especially with teams in every time zone in America playing in between the Big 12 and the ACC. It's going to be really fascinating, but there's some really, really fun games on this Big Monday schedule.
What's weird about that? Okay, so I have some of our best friends live in Mesa, Arizona, just in the Phoenix area. And that's one of the, I guess Arizona as a state maybe is one of the ones that goes between.
Arizona they don't do daylight savings time.
Yeah.
So
that time of year,
different.
I don't know if they're mountain or Pacific, but I think that's going to be a late one for us, Andy. We're going to have to buckle up for that. But what I love about this Big Monday schedule, it's 6 weeks worth of it. Andy, if I said, hey, tell me who you think are going to be the 5 best teams in the Big 12 this season, who would you say? In whatever order.
Kansas, Houston, Iowa State, Baylor, Arizona. I think that would be my 5 right there, right?
Okay. So let me tell you these 6 matchups. January 27th, Iowa State at Arizona. Boom,
Boom.
both of those. The next week, Iowa State at Kansas. Man, these poor Cyclones are getting shipped around. February 10th, Baylor at Houston. February 17th, we actually get 2 games, Arizona at Baylor, and then also Kansas State at Utah in what we'll call the B game. Sorry, guys. And then February 24th, Houston at Texas Tech, Kansas at Colorado, and then the last week, Kansas at Houston. So, Andy, all 6 of those weeks feature, I think, what is it? It would be 8 total games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are matchups between 2 of those 5 schools, and all of them but one, the Kansas State at Utah game, involve at least one of those 5 schools. ESPN is clearly no dummies when it comes to this scheduling.
And we said the B game comment there, but like the fact that Kansas State at Utah, if you were to pick any 8 games in college basketball and say definitively that Kansas State at Utah is the worst game out of the schedule, like the first thing I would think is, wow, that must mean those other 7 games are really good. I'm not super high on Utah, although I am pretty intrigued by Kansas State in particular and that road trip for them. Like that's a pretty fascinating game to be, again, pretty distant last among these 8 games that are going to be played on Big Monday for the Big 12. That is a testament to this conference's willingness to schedule some of those toughest games in these days.
And the ACC game that night is Duke at Virginia. I mean, we are going to be
the TJ Power game.
Yes. Well played. Yes. Anyway, Big Monday loaded. Andy, you had written an article after the Big 12 slate came out on Thursday, and you had kind of 3 big observations. We're talking Mondays. Another one of them, oh, by the way, just so happens to be on both our daughters' birthdays, the last Saturday of the regular season, which not only we're going to be navigating how to celebrate our daughters well, but also, Andy, you noted what an absolutely bonkers loaded day the last Saturday of the regular season is.
March 8th, it's going to be an incredible day of college basketball, not just in the Big 12, but you could have a fully happy day just watching Big 12 hoops with the amount of games that are going to be going on. All 16 teams in action. Like we said, this is one of the weeks where there's not going to be any games on Sunday. I'm just going to read the matchups here because this is incredible. Arizona at Kansas. What a finisher for the Wildcats. We'll talk a little bit more about the end of the season schedule for them. You got Iowa State at Kansas State, Houston at Baylor, Utah at BYU. So maybe not the best teams, but that is an incredible rivalry. And Provo is an incredible place for a game like that. You got TCU at Colorado, Texas Tech at Arizona State, Central Florida at West Virginia, and Cincinnati at Oklahoma State. So that, I mean, your first 4 or 5 games there are all must-watch basketball games. Arizona at Kansas, Houston at Baylor, Iowa State at Kansas State is an incredible trio of games, all taking place on the same day. The hope for the Big 12 is that these games are going to have a significant impact on the seeding, whether it's NCAA tournament seeding, whether it's Big 12 conference tournament seeding, likely going to be both. And it's going to be really fun to see how that date impacts the rest of the season for the Big 12 and for college basketball at large, because there's no doubt in my mind that these matchups are going to be critical for how these teams are perceived going into the NCAA tournament.
And they got to get this right and have those first 3 games in 3 different windows, Andy.
Yes.
That'll be key. Because we mentioned that top 5 that we think, and I think we both feel comfortable saying, tell me if you feel differently, but I think Kansas State is number 6 for me, just right behind those. And so to get all 6 of those schools playing shows, again, that comment we read earlier, that they were smart in how they scheduled this. There are a couple ways I wish they had matched it a little differently. Like, I wish we were getting Cincinnati, West Virginia that night, kind of like the Pittsburgh, West Virginia backyard brawl kind of thing. Like, so there's a couple differences I'd like to see, but for the most part, I love the matchups of that day.
Yeah, hard to complain too much. And we mentioned the Arizona side of things, and I wanted to touch on this because I'm always curious how premier brands or programs kind of get welcomed into their new conference from a scheduling perspective. And again, I appreciate that the Big 12 did kind of make an indication of, hey, we talked to coaches, we use these different metrics to help determine our schedule. But Arizona's got a pretty easy start to Big 12 play. Their first game is TCU at home on December 30th. Their next 2 games are both on the road, but it's Cincinnati and West Virginia. Again, not bad teams necessarily. Certainly Morgantown is not an easy place to play, but not teams that we're projecting to be ranked in the top 25 at the start of the year, and probably not ranked then. I guess we'll never know, or we won't know yet. But then they got Central Florida on January 11th. And then I think their first ranked game or their first high-profile game is after that. I think they play Baylor on like the 14th, but they kind of get eased into action a little bit in the Big 12. But the problem with that is that what goes around comes around. You're going to end up playing the tough teams. You're going to play the hard games eventually. And Arizona, as a team that has a fair amount of continuity on their roster, but obviously has a lot of newcomers as well, with some transfers coming in, Anthony Del Orso coming in, Trey Townsend, Toby Waka. They're going to kind of have an opportunity to get those guys more acclimated to the system, to what Lloyd's trying to do before they really play their tough games. But between February 11th and March 8th, these are all road games that Arizona will play in that just under 1 month span. Kansas State, Baylor, Iowa State, and Kansas. All of those teams on the road in a 3-week period of time. They are favored in 8 of their first 10 conference games, according to Torvik, and they are underdogs in 6 of their 10 last games in the conference, according to Bart Torvik right now. So pretty clearly seeing an easier front end for Arizona. I don't know that necessarily is super helpful for them. It's just something that was easy to know when looking at the schedule.
And I think, Andy, the more and more I look, especially on the conferences that are ESPN affiliated, ESPN has been doing more and more and more of this with their top flight teams, of making sure they have a backloaded schedule as more and more eyeballs are switching over once football's done. And so I think that Arizona is a great example of that within this. But so, hey, they're saying, hey, thank you very much, schedule makers, as we come in, figure out this new schedule. This is going to be helpful. Andy, the other thing quickly as we get ready to move on, you had just also noted in your article, Wednesday night is kind of party night here in the Big 12. And obviously each Wednesday is somewhere between 2, 3, 4 games. It's just part of that midweek gauntlet. And then there are no games Thursdays or Fridays. So this is kind of like the breaking point on the back end of things. But some of the highlights, Andy, for this Wednesday night party night, get your kazoos ready, folks. We got Kansas at Iowa State on January 15th. Ames is going to be rocking. We'll see if we can get some Hilton magic going there. We also get Kansas at TCU on January 22nd. Kansas State at Baylor that same night. Oh my, buckle up. That's 3 days before my birthday, Andy. So happy birthday to me on Big 12 Wednesday night. I'm looking forward to all of that. Andy, we need to switch our attention from Big 12. It's been a great conversation about the front end of that. But now, as a reminder, folks, I'm sure you all heard the news last week. UNLV quarterback Matthew Sluka opted out of the season from a whole new round of NIL concerns, which are certain to trickle down to college basketball. Where do we go from here? We're going to try to answer that question in just a second. Right after I tell you about Game Time. Look, going to live events is the absolute best, man. We're like 5 weeks into the football season now, and you just feel the energy. You get the crispness of fall, all the pumpkin, everything is happening. My next door neighbors have their skeletons out on the roof and invading their truck. It's great. But going to live events now, music, theater, comedy, and getting back to college football games, college basketball games coming up in like a month. Man, I'm looking forward to making all new memories this season. Well, great news. When you're getting tickets, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. What Game Time Picks does is filter out all the fluff and just shows you the best deals, so you don't have to waste time wading around and searching through the muck to find the best tickets. So whether it's Game Time ticket coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from the seat that you can find in the app, Game Time has got you covered. Andy, we've just been talking Big 12. How about the football championship game for Big 12? I found tickets for $86 each in section 407, row 9. That's pretty stinking impressive, man. And there's many more great seats, many more great prices, just depending on how all in you want to go on this thing. But man, you can go find your way to that Big 12 championship game. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? Game time. Last week, Andy, UNLV quarterback Matthew Sluka just kind of pieced out that we're not going to get into litigating any of that, other than to say it had to do with a whole misunderstanding with NIL funds and what was happening and what wasn't. We haven't yet seen this in college basketball, but it seems like it's only a matter of not if, but when this happens. I'm surprised it took until the last week of September in 2024 for us to hear of this, because we've already seen a couple others follow suit in the wake of it. So, Andy, also in the wake of this, NCAA President Charlie Baker came out with some statements. I read an article on ESPN that was put together by the AP, and he had just some interesting comments on it. And let me read the first quote of this, because this was what really stood out to me. The president of the NCAA lashed out at evidence of dysfunction in today's NIL environment while reiterating his desire to see Congress create national guidelines to shape so-called name, image, and likeness endorsement deals that are reshaping college sports. Andy, I cannot with this whole thing, because you know what? How on earth is this man failing to see that it was his own organization's lack of ability to get out ahead of NIL and go with it that could have taken care of all of this? Because if the NCAA, instead of dragging their feet and only getting into the NIL game because states were starting to sue them and allow their athletes to do it, that the NCAA said, fine, I guess we'll do it. And because it went that way with the tail wagging the dog, now you see the landscape and you see how jacked up it is. But you know what, Andy? If the NCAA had been willing to say, we've had this amateurism model for forever, but it's broke and the landscape is changing. And so that we don't miss the boat, we better get out ahead of this thing. How are we going to handle name, image, and likeness so that we can rein it in and make sure things are in good shape? Had the NCAA done that, I'm not saying it would have been perfect or figured out, but we would not be turning to Congress to regulate this thing. That is absurd to me. And so Charlie Baker's comments here are wildly tone deaf and, quite frankly, ironic.
Yeah, and to me, it's just, I wouldn't feel good being like, please help me, Congress. Like, it's just such a sad statement to be making. Like, I get like the litigation, the rules that have happened, the things that have changed, the lack of two-time transfers getting immediate eligibility, like things like that have gone through courts, have never really favored the NCAA. They've almost universally been in favor of a free market, in favor of student athletes getting the opportunity to leave schools when they want and do kind of what they want, for lack of a better word. So for the NCAA to have not put in any regulations, not done anything kind of ahead of time, as you acknowledged, the Ed O'Bannon case took like years, like almost a decade. It's not like we didn't know that this was happening. To have not made any progress to get out ahead of this, to put rules in place, to at least have conversations about it, then to watch the courts continue to work against the NCAA, and then to say, well, it's all crazy now, I guess we're just hoping Congress will help us. Like, what? That doesn't seem like it makes any sense to me. It's very baffling. The NCAA absolutely had an opportunity to get out ahead of this and do something. Again, maybe they were striving for perfection. You're not going to find perfection. The solution that's going to come out of this, the first thing that gets put in place, is not going to be perfect. My hope is that it is contracts. I think at some level, we know that there's a push to get the NIL to be out of the collectives and through the university right now. Yeah. Universities paying players directly, not something that's happening, something that is going to be happening. And that is a positive step. And there was a great quote. So shortly after this Matthew Sluka thing happened at UNLV, there was a coaching conversation in the SEC, and Brian Kelly was speaking, and Kirby Smart, the Georgia coach, was speaking. And Brian Kelly said that the third party NIL collective is a problem because the coaches lose control. Yeah. Like and what fascinates me about the UNLV situation is we've already seen multiple different perspectives. Some people believe that the quarterback was being greedy and was demanding more money because the season was going well, and just decided, look, I'm not going to play unless you pay me more money than you already agreed to pay me. That's a perspective that some people have. The other perspective is that what he is saying, which is, I was told I would get $100,000. They have paid me $3,000. They have offered to pay me another $12,000. That's nowhere close to what I asked for. I'm going to stop playing for the team. And then there's the perspective that the agent completely screwed him out of this situation, didn't do enough diligence on his end, didn't take care of his client, and now he's trying to backtrack and blah, 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 whatever. Whatever perspective you have is solved by contracts. And I think that's where, to me, it's like, it's frustrating of like, yes, contracts are not perfect. And it feels weird to have them in college sports, but every one of those issues is solved. Sign a contract. Kirby Smart mentioned we could have 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year contracts. You can choose which one to sign. If you're and taking it to a basketball perspective, if you're a mid-major school and you know that a lot of guys are probably going to try to jump after a year, sign them to a 1 year deal. Sign them to a 1 year deal. Or if it's a guy where it's like, hey, we really want to keep you for a longer time, we're going to give you more money, but we want to make it a 2 year deal. We want to make sure you're here for at least 2 seasons type of thing. It's going to get messy. It's going to get weird. People aren't going to like it. I understand all of that. But to me, it just seems so much more ironclad. Like this whole Sluka situation, if he signed a contract and says, I want more money, I'm not playing anymore, they'd say, okay, we're just tearing up your contract. You're done. Like, that's it. Problem solved. If the situation was the team not honoring the contract, you can prove that pretty easily. So it just feels like that helps solve so much of these problems. And while it creates new problems and it doesn't solve every current problem, and the implementation process seems incredibly arduous, it feels like the eventual direction we're going to go. And I'd rather see them just try it now as opposed to trying a bunch of other stuff that's not going to work or waiting for Congress to care about this. It just feels like the solution is to just let's figure out how to get these contracts in, get this system set up, tweak it later on, and hope from there that we can kind of find a spot where it works as best as possible.
And the whole thing's, and it's not even just like Andy, I feel like I'm always confused. It used to be like on the media side of things, we would, if I needed an interview with the player, who do you go to? The sports information director, and say, hey, sports information director at Ohio University, I'd like to have a conversation with your star quarterback, Andy Patton. Great, let's set that up. Now it's like, do we go to the SID? Do we go to the agent? Do we go to the collective? Do we go to the business that has set up the NIL opportunity? Like just everything needs contracts and understanding, and we're just not there. It's got to happen. Something's got to come into play, but it all goes back to the NCAA's inability to get this thing regulated on their end from the beginning of this whole thing, and that's why we're in the mess we're in today.
Yeah, the fact that college athletics is less regulated than professional sports is very clearly a problem, and one that I hope will be resolved soon in some capacity, because this is going to happen in college basketball this year. I guarantee you that somebody in the Division I college basketball, 361 teams, somebody is going to opt out of the rest of the season because they are not happy with their NIL payment. Maybe it's because truly they're not getting paid what they said they were going to get paid. Maybe it's because they want more money. Again, whatever the situation is, it is likely that had a contract been in place, whatever situation arrives wouldn't have happened the same way. So that to me is why it feels like this is just an obvious and easy way to curb a lot of the issues that we're seeing and going to continue to see in college athletics until there's some level of regulation. Isaac, that is going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We are going to be back with you 5 days a week, continuing for now through the rest of the month, and then we're going to be hitting you with actual game stuff 5 weeks away from now. Gonzaga Baylor is kicking off the season November 4th, the Spokane Arena. So excited for that game. Going to be fantastic. We got team previews coming your way. We got conference previews coming your way. We got more on recruiting, more on everything else going on in this college basketball space coming your way this month. So excited about it. Folks, thank you so much for listening. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's Go Wildcats talked a lot about Tommy Lloyd's team today. And until tomorrow,
and K-State, peace!